Well, we've got another standout progressive rock album to hit our landscape within this year, and we're only 3 months in, and I feel like we've already had a full year's worth of really great progressive rock music. So, yeah, let's just keep on going. Blazing Revelations by Dominic Sanderson. So, Dominic Sanderson is a UK progressive rock artist. He kind of got his start in the early 2020s. His first record was Impermanence from last year of 2023. Actually, that's 2 years ago because we're in 2025. I got to keep reminding myself that. And it was fine. You know, it was a fun record. It kind of reminded me of if Vandergraaf Generator meshed with Steven Wilson a little bit, especially on the world record side of things with Vandergraaf and the Grace for Drowning side of Steven Wilson. And so I was always kind of looking forward to whatever Dominic wanted to do next. And luckily we don't have to wait all that long. Here we are at the beginning of 2025 with Blazing Revelations. And I've got two minds of this record, and I want to touch upon what I like first about this record, and then I'll move on to some of my, not complaints, that's not quite the criticisms, isn't quite, concerns, isn't quite, the drawbacks to this record. First off, the musicianship is top notch. You know, we are definitely utilizing the techniques and the stylings of the 1970s progressive rock era to a T. You know, I know that he's being influenced by bands like King Crimson, Pink Floyd, Genesis, yes, ELP, but I think the biggest influence on this is Vandergraaf Generator, and I'm going to touch upon that when we get into the drawbacks to this record. But the musicianship, the compositions, the mode of which the music is being presented, all fantastic. You know, this is really the top shelf progressive rock music that we would have gotten from the 1970s. This boy right behind me is staring me in the face for a very obvious reason. And I appreciate that. You know, I'm always on the lookout for really great progressive rock music. Even if this style of prog isn't necessarily my favorite, I'm more on the side of the symphonic progressive rock stylings rather than the eclectic progressive rock stylings. But when the eclecticness hits and we have some very satisfying crescendos, build-ups, you know, call and response, that type of stuff, or there's doing some really interesting innovations within it, because for the eclectic side to work, in my mind, it has to be a blending of innovation and revelation. And we'll touch upon that a little bit later on. The other thing that I really particularly love about this record is the structuring of this record. There's very clearly two sides to this record, and there's 4 tracks on this, 2 on each side. You've got From the Weeping Cradle and The Faithless Folly on the first side, both being, 12 minutes and 10 minutes respectively. And then the second side, we've got The Right of Wrongs, right as in R-I-T, R-I-T-E, at 6.5 minutes-ish. And then The Lullaby for a Broken Dream at the 16-minute, mini epic. I like to think that the 16 minutes are around the mini epics. And both sides kind of have their own distinct features about it. And it kind of reminds me of, I'm going to lean on Vandergraaf again, like a God Bluff, where you had Scorched Earth and Arrow being very much the first side of that record. And then you had Sleepwalkers and whatever that other track was on the second side, And so you have this big, prominent, meaty track ending the album and 2 very beautiful tracks opening it up, with a track that's just fine, kind of sandwiched between the 2. And so within this, we've got, if I just want to use From the Weeping Cradle as kind of the example here, brilliant song structures. We've got some really great mellotron, some really great synths going on here, that's blending really well within some really fun guitar work. Right off the get-go, you're introduced to the soundscapes, and it's like, okay, yeah, Vandergraaf Generator, Anglegar, All Traps on Earth. This style, this eclectic prog is just hitting me right in the face. It's jazzy, it's free flowing thoughts, it's kind of chaos, but it's all kind of working together into a cohesive whole that I particularly love. They're not only, creating some really interesting soundscapes within the notes that they're choosing to play, but also how they're playing it, which instrument is taking on which motif, because, the rhythm and the lead of whatever is trading off so quickly that it's kind of hard to even tell which one's doing what. Then we come into the vocal stylings, and immediately I'm like, yeah, that's Peter Hamill. Full stop. Like, this is where I'm going to start moving into some of my criticisms about this. And this is, I want to approach this not necessarily as criticisms, but as somebody more that indulges in this style of music that's become, I don't want to say a connoisseur, right? But it's like, I've been around the block enough to know a good hamburger from a great hamburger. I've had so many hamburgers in my time that I know the difference between a greasy spoon, mom and pop, fill the hole, very satisfying burger, and a delicate, very well crafted, not only does it fill the hole, but it satisfies, it has extra flourishes, it's doing something that I've never had before, kind of a hamburger. That's the last I'm going to say of that whole metaphor. I get leaning on your influences, but this is where I feel the leaning on the influences become a crutch. And I wish that Dominic, whoever is doing the main singing, and I believe it's Dominic, could find his own voice, literally and figuratively, because the voice that he's using is Peter Hamill. Like, straight up. Like, if you had told me this was a Peter Hamill track, I would have believed you. Like, Peter's got a very good case if he ever wanted to be like, hey man, that's infringing on copyright, like the words might be different, the sounds might be a little bit on the different side of things, but there's my voice, so like, and I get being a progressive rock band, especially a retro prog band that's doing the whole eclectic thing, like it comes baked in with being a modern progressive rock band that you're going to be leaning on your influences, but I just feel like the creativity that's being found on here needed its own voice. It needed its own styles. If you wanted to do the Peter Hamill voice, then find your own way of doing it. Because here it just feels like a ripoff, and it's immediately noticeable. Like, immediately. Because the only people that are going to be listening to your music are those who love the progressive rock from the 70s. And I can guarantee you that maybe 1 out of every 100 listeners won't be familiar with the Van de Graaff Generator catalog. So, yeah. I think that's my biggest criticism is they're not distancing themselves enough away from their influences as well as their contemporaries. Like, I would much rather sit down and listen to a Wobbler or a All Traps on Earth or even an Anglagard that has done this style of music before, and I don't want to say better, because I feel like this band is operating on a different frequency, like a different landscape than those other bands, because they tend to be a little bit more either dour or depressive or minor key. I think Wobbler's the only one that's more similar to this. But on the same token, like, I'd rather just listen to the influences than listen to this. For another example, The Right of Wrongs sounds like an Anthony Phillips track in having a plethora of flutes on it, and having that very beautiful, like, rhythm guitar, like acoustic rhythm guitar. It almost feels like a Steve Hackett from Ace of Wands, so it's either Anthony Phillips from The Geese and the Ghost, or we're dealing with a Steve Hackett with Voyage of the Acolyte for the Ace of Wands. And at that point, I'm like, well, I would just rather sit down and listen to those records. Like, there's nothing new on this record. It just seems like it's a rehash. It's a summarization of the things that came before it. It's like, suddenly I understand Anthony Fantano's criticisms of the Raven That Refused to Sing from Stephen Wilson. If that's how he approached it, right? That's the same thing that I'm approaching it with this. So yeah, I don't want to rag on this too much, and I don't want to, spend too much time on the negatives. I just wanted to get those out of the way before I dive into my conclusion of this record. And my conclusion is that it is a good record. This is a solid record, a solid progressive rock piece. I do feel, for me, my criticisms do outweigh the benefits of this, and I probably won't be returning to this one as much as some of the other albums that have come out very recently. It's still fun. Like, I didn't talk too much about Faithless Folly, which has some fun within the rhythm styles, that has some fun, playing between the saxophone and the Hammond organ. Again, I'd rather just listen to Van der Graaf Generator if I wanted that. But also, I want to at least, recognize that Lullaby for the Broken Dream being the 16-minute epic. It is a very pleasant climb, and it showcases the musicianship. Like, I know that there's talent behind this band, and I know that the driving forces on this band have some really beautiful keys to unlock some really beautiful music, and it just feels like they would rather play within a comfortable wheelhouse than breaking out of it. And the whole point of the eclectic progressive rock movement was to break the barriers, not to build them back up again. So that's where I'm kind of struggling with this album. And I wanted to like it a lot more than I eventually did. But if you love this record, I completely understand why. There's a lot of really meaty, really great prog moments on this. And, there's some really interesting things that's going on this record. I'm just looking for a little bit more innovation when I'm approaching the eclectic prog side of things. So yeah, that's my whole thought of the Blazing Revelations from Dominic Sanders, and I think my final rating for this record will be Blazing Revelations by Dominic Sanders is an album that I would ultimately stream. Again, I would fully understand why people would love this record, and I could understand and totally appreciate it getting the praise and the flowers that it is getting. I would recommend this for anybody that's looking for new music from bands like Van der Graaf Generator, or, those more eclectic side of things like a King Crimson, or even like a Anglegar, if we're going more contemporary in that case. But don't come to this record expecting a blazing revelation in terms of the music. It's very safe. But that's kind of where I'm at for Blazing Revelations. What did you guys think about this record? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below. We've got a lot of great music coming out. I've got a lot of reviews to get through. Man, I'm going to be busy in March, but I'm super stoked for it. I hope you are too. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it for today. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.